Hey everyone, this is Dr. Syed Haider, and I'm super pleased to be here with Marc Girardot. He is, so I actually don't know that much about your background, so I would love if you started, if you didn't prepare very much here. If you could tell me a little bit about your background along with the listeners. But I will just say as a preface that I came across your Bolus theory on your Substack, which we will tell people about. I forget, what was the name of your Substack again?
It's
COVID
called the
Mythbuster?
COVID Mythbuster series.
Yeah. COVID Mythbusters. So that's an excellent Substack. And the thing that I think you've become a bit famous for is the bolus theory of how vaccines may be harming people. And since I read that, I thought it was very plausible. And I started telling everyone that I knew who was still pro-vaccine that if you're going to get a vaccine, at least tell them to do it this way, right? So we'll talk about what that way is to protect yourself from an injury. But before that, again, please tell me a bit more about yourself, what your background is, where you come from, what you've done in the past.
Okay, I'm an outlier here. I'm really a generalist who's completely out of his field. My background is business. I have an MBA from INSEAD, one of the leading business schools in the world. I've been doing consulting mostly. I was the head of the automotive practice for Cisco's advisory consulting group in the automotive space. So basically, I advised CEOs and board members of all the big car players. And my background, I was born in the U.S. I was born in San Francisco. My dad's an engineer. He worked for Bechtel Corporation. I come from a long history or family of engineers, and my dad unfortunately passed away when I was young. So I was a young teen, and I didn't work on science or anything. I just went to business. I'm the little black duckling, basically. And I've worked in a number of different areas, deep. I had been asked by the CEO of Cisco in France about 10 years ago to work on helping a life science company. For some reason, he trusted me more than he trusted the life science guys. And so I had a first dip into biotech about, a bit more than 10 years ago. And then just before COVID, I was advising a competitor to Moderna and BioNTech with they have a anti-cancer vaccine, a DNA anti-cancer vaccine, and I had worked with them for about a year, going deep into the science. So I was basically prepped for COVID 4 years ago.
Okay. And then during the pandemic, at what point did you start writing the COVID Mythbusters series, and how did that affect you personally and professionally?
So I started writing articles first on LinkedIn, which was really a bad idea professionally. Almost immediately. I wrote my first piece on a simulation I had done on New York, late April, early May 2020, in which I basically had found a way to prove that the infection fatality rate was 0.1%. And after that, I went on, I joined Panda. Some of you might know Nick Hudson, and we have a wonderful team, very balanced citizens who have been doing science and talking about lockdowns, etc. And then Steve Kirch asked me to join his scientific board with Biron Brittle, with Peter McCullough, with just a big team of A players in the field. I'm just a B player.
At VCRF, you're talking about?
No, he has his own. He's had his own sort of a team, and we would meet up every week with Biron Brittle, with Jessica Rose, with Kevin McKernan. So I was part of this team from early beginning because I had done a benchmark. I saw that the vaccines were doing something like almost immediately. And so I dove into the data and figured out ways, and I did a benchmark on basically supposedly COVID death in tropical islands, where if anybody who's been on a tropical island in May knows that you're not going to catch a cold there. So for me, that was a very strong signal to see all these, Seychelles and all these islands. When they started, they had zero COVID for months and months and months. And then when they started vaccinating, immediately they had COVID deaths. So that's when Steve called me up, and I joined with Matthew Crawford and all that team.
Are you still on his board? Do you still join those meetings?
Yeah, I mean, it's much less active now. First of all, everybody's very busy, but we have a call every month. I haven't been on it for a few times. We're in regular contact with Steve and Jessica and Kevin and stuff. So we talk, not daily, but we talk regularly.
So, what do you think the pandemic was?
It's a hard question. I think it was a form of collective dystopia. I mean, there is a real virus. There's no question there. I mean, I got it. A lot of people had it. There is nothing really truly novel about it from our immune system, because cross immunity works fantastically well, and that's one of the things I've been talking about in 2020. I was one of the guys pushing cross immunity and saying, there's no way it's going to harm anybody. I mean, it's going to harm elderly or immunocompromised people, but it's maybe a bit harder than some of the traditional flus and colds, but it's the same thing. After that, it's the response, the crazy response where everybody threw out the window all their public health policies to apply what I call the Bill Gates protocol. Not because he invented it, because the people around him pushed that, and it was sort of, and that's where the whole dystopia came along and killed a lot of people. I mean, the first bit was crazy because they stopped, they stopped providing care. They stopped providing antibiotics. They started providing anti-inflammatory, and they started intubating everybody like crazy across the world. And when they start doing that, that's when people start dying. Remember, COVID was in Europe in September 2019. Okay, that's proven. So that's where this whole thing started, because I realized that I had either this thing was running really fast and not killing people, or it was really running very, very slowly and killing a lot. It couldn't be both. And we knew it was running very fast. So for me, it's a collective dystopia, and there's all sorts of things that materialized. Bill Gates' ego thing. There's a lot of course, the media. The fact that they manipulated the media, etc., made that whole thing crystallize. This is not really my main area of expertise. I'd rather talk about the Bolus theory, which is much more important than that.
Sure. As a lead into the Bolus theory, can we talk about why you think that the spike protein itself can't be the cause of vaccine injury, and people who have similar long haul, quote unquote, long haul syndromes that look similar to vaccine injury, but these people have never had vaccines. They just got what they thought was COVID.
So in both cases, the harm is done by the immune system. People need to understand that. Okay, it's the immune reaction that's causing the harm. It's not the spike. It's not the virus. So on your question of the spike, I wrote a piece where I have 14 different ways to falsify the spike, the circulating spike theory. Right. The fact is, the theory goes that there's so much spike that's produced, and our bodies are just being rampaged by that overload of spike protein in our blood. Well, first of all, that theory breaks just about at least 3 or 4 major scientific laws. It just breaks them. It's like, so nobody's, the first one is antibody binding. We have antibodies, it's chemistry, they bind, right? And we know that everybody's got tons of antibodies. And when you do the math, when you compare the quantities of spike and the quantities of antibodies, you'll be amazed. We're overwhelmed by antibodies, not spike. So that's the first point. The second point that it breaks, it's the T cell efficacy. Why? Because once the T cells are primed, when the T cells are trained, if you will, they will attack extremely, extremely quickly. It's not, they're not on the beach and having fun. These things are machines that save our lives every day. And they're ruthless and they're extremely effective. And so once they're primed, there's hardly any production of spike. And when you look at the data, and that's how it should be, right? And when you look at the data from Harvard in Ogata and al. From May 2021, that's exactly what's happening, right? You have at the first dose, you have a peak of spike at the day 5, which basically is when the T cells are killing all those cells that are infected, and then all the spike is basically being unloaded into the bloodstream and being very, very quickly neutralized by the antibodies. And you see the drop. You see that the drop after 9 days, you can't see spike anymore. Then they do the second shot.
So the T cells, what does the T cell priming do? So I understand. So the spike that is produced is bound to the antibodies. What are the T cells doing?
Well, the T cells are destroying the factories. They're destroying them so quickly that they can't produce spike at the second dose. If you look at Ogata at all, that's exactly what's happening. There's hardly any detectable spike protein being produced. Okay, and here's the disconnect: is there are more accidents in dose 2 and 3 than there are in dose 1, right? So that's the third point. The second point. The third point is it's all about the vascular system disseminative faculties or feature. The fact is, our bloodstream does a few things pretty well, but our vascular system does one thing really well. It disseminates. And it doesn't send like a ton of oxygen in one area and nothing on the other. It never does that. If it did that, we'd be dead all the time. What it does is it spreads everything. And so how do you get concentrated hits of proteins in the aorta? You don't. It's mathematically impossible. So just on these, I can continue. There's many other ways you can falsify circulating spike. Now, that doesn't mean that there cannot be spike circulating in the future, and there's a few scenarios where that can occur, but it's certainly not the cause of the harm. The last point, when you look at the autopsies and the biopsies at the wound, okay, what do you find? You find that it's always immune mediated by T cells, always, okay? It's always infiltrated by lymphocytes, always CD4s and CD8s. It's always extremely concentrated. So you got a ton of them. How do you do that? It's impossible without a bolus. It's impossible that you actually would get transfection mathematically concentrated in such a way that you would get that damage, so much damage that you would have an aneurysm. It's impossible, okay? The only way you can do that, there's two ways you could do that, okay? It's a bolus, or you start doing teletransportation, okay? So Star Trek, okay? There's no other way you can do it. There's no other way you can do it. So now, I didn't come up with this idea, off of my head. First of all, I completely reverse engineer everything. What people are not doing in the team reality thing is that nobody's actually trained in root cause analysis. Okay, I'm trained in that. I worked in the automotive industry. That's what the automotive industry does. Okay, that's why the quality levels are extremely high in the automotive industry, because we know how to fix things. How do you fix something like that? You go to the wounds and you figure out what's going on, right? How come it's concentrated? How come it's T cells and not B cells? If it's not B cells, it can't be spike. It can't be circulating spike. Now,
don't they find spike protein in the damaged tissues?
Yes, of course they do. Of course they do, because the T cells are destroying spike factories, right? So if you blow up a plant that's building toys, you're going to have toys around it. It doesn't mean that the toys destroy the plants. Okay, you're just destroying this. The spike is the antigen, right? That's what it is. The antigen being the foreign material that you're supposed to train your immune system against. Okay, so if you look at the Pfizer explanation of what the mRNA vaccine does, it shows that they're transfecting, so they're inserting the mRNA. It's starting to produce spike, okay? And there's this little thing on the top that says fragments of spike, or fragments of antigen. It's basically bits of the spike that are presented on something called the MHCs. When that occurs, right, and your immune system realizes it's not you, it's a virus, or it's a vaccine, or it's whatever, or it's a mutation that you're not supposed to have, that cell is going to be destroyed. Okay, so that's a fundamental part of Bolus theory. There's two parts to Bolus theory. Okay, so and people are probably not understanding, because we're going into we're already in the details without really understanding what the Bolus theory is.
Before we get to it, I just want to understand. Obviously, if you are transfecting cells and they're exploding, you're destroying your own cells, right? That's one problem with the way that this vaccine works. If you destroy a bunch of cells anywhere, you're going to have a problem. In one specific location, if you destroy a bunch of aorta cells, you could bleed out from your aorta. Okay, but let's say that that wasn't an issue, right? So people, you hear a lot about this, like spike itself is toxic, right? So is spike a toxic protein for the human body in any way at all, right? Like if you have a lot of spike, even bound up in your tissues, let's say spike is obviously bound up by, an antibody, and we make antibodies, right? Like we make anti-spike antibodies as well, right? Antibodies to the antibody that kind of look like the spike in a sense. Is there any problem from these antigen antibody complexes, or from the antibodies to the antibodies, or from spike itself? Say it was, bound to a receptor somewhere, as well as being bound to an antibody.
So the really what people need to understand is, I don't go into all those rabbit holes too much, because there's no substance to most of them. So let's back off a minute. The first thing is toxicity is tied to dose. Okay, we've known that since Mithridates the Great or whatever. Okay, you and I can take poison. Okay, and if take a small dose, it's okay. Okay, these vaccines are poison at the right dose. Okay, if I did a calculation, I don't know what nobody's been doing that, but I'm one of the rare guys, if not the only guy, who actually went and said, okay, well, are those, is the weight of this, is it comparable to bee venom or a spider bite? Is what have the people from Pfizer and Moderna done a good job? And Pfizer's done a very good job. And there's no question that it's huge in terms of killing capacity, because each one of these cells, of these nanoparticles, can actually have one cell killed. So there's this singularity of lethality that is enormous, because they're injecting you with 10 billion of them. Okay, that's Pfizer. Moderna is 4 times that. It's 40 billion. So on paper, theoretically, it's completely crazy to inject ourselves with that quantity of potential poison. Now, to put a little nuance to what I'm saying, is extremely difficult to transfect. Okay, it's very ineffective. What people do, I've worked for an anti-cancer company. We had to electrocute people to transfect. Okay, we're using electroporation. So it's very hard. That's why they're injecting those huge doses. Okay, to actually, and especially they're injecting it in the muscle, which is not very smart, because there are hardly any immune cells in the muscle. So going back to the point, it is poison in low dose. Okay, and they did a very good job at that. And frankly, if they go to court, I would say the same thing. They did a good job. You can't blame Pfizer and Moderna for that. You can blame them for other things, possibly, but not for that. And so the problem, it's not because they are great, it's our bodies are great. You need to understand what people keep forgetting, and I'm very upset on all these different theories, is those are in vitro theories. They're basically lab work theories without the immune system's reaction, without the vascular system's protection, without all of that, and therefore completely irrelevant, right? You need to understand how the body is going to react. And the fundamental problem with the Bolus theory, which is to inject directly into the bloodstream, okay, by accident, or not actually, but is that what you do is you bypass millions of years of evolution, where the body has evolved to do two things. On the genetic side, it's hidden away the stem cells. It's put them into the bone marrow, very far away from bacteria and viruses, so that they can't be touched, right? And on the other side, it's built an architecture of the vascular system that is basically extremely good at when it gets poison, to minimize the impact it has on the vascular system and the organs, and it gets 99% of it without to the liver and to the spleen, where it's going to get filtered. And then it's going to do, of course, the liver might be overwhelmed, or the concentration is maybe too big.
I mean, if you were to consume a toxin or like a poison by mouth,
if you're eating or drinking or breathing a toxic, then your vascular system is going to use the bulletproof vest concept, and what it's going to do is going to disseminate the poison, so that the poison is in minuscule amounts everywhere in your body, and therefore your body locally will be able to deal with it. The problem is, if you bypass that's architecture, you actually run the risk of high concentration transfection somewhere on the one end, and then reaching stem cells which you would never reach with a normal injection. And that's the two fundamental pillars of my theory, of the Bolus theory. One is what happens when you inject in the bloodstream. I didn't invent this. There are books about it in medical school, about how you deliver drugs to organs in a concentrated fashion. You create a bolus, you inject exactly like Bill Gates is saying, which is completely crazy. We say, oh, we inject into the blood vessels and we go, poof. Well, you should never do that with a vaccine. That's when you want to kill people. But with some of the drugs, that's what you do. And what it does, it sends down your blood vessels a concentrated swarm of particles, okay? Highly concentrated. In the case of the vaccine, if you compare it based on the Acuitas study on the mice, the concentration is 270 1,000 times higher. Okay, so it creates this magnifying glass effects, whereby instead of having, one ray of light hitting, now you have all this concentrated lights hitting. Here, same thing. Instead of having one lipid nanoparticle hitting the aorta in a piece like that, you're going to have 4,000 of them, right? And so what you're virtually doing is carpet bombing your endothelium. Okay, what happens is all those cells are start producing spike. Okay, they're detected, and the immune system just goes in and just gets rid of it. Now you need to realize, I mean, I'm sure you do, is in cancer, in a few weeks or even a few days, you can reduce a bull like this, right? The immune system is extremely powerful at destroying cells. It does that very effectively. So a few thousand cells on your endothelium, right? I think I had calculated a 1 centimeter diameter hole into your aorta is about 60,000 nanoparticles. That's 0.0006% of what you're injected with. You see the disconnect.
Yeah. Can you go back to explaining why it's entering the bloodstream at all? People are being injected in the muscle; they're not being injected like IV, right? So how does it? Why? And
well, I've been fighting this battle with doctors for almost 3 years now, and I think there's a huge, the problem is it's very hard to inject in a vein properly. Okay, no doubt about that. And so doctors have that reference. I can't find the vein. I need to do it right without hurting, etc. Now, this is not what we're talking about. Okay, first of all, if you get the entire dose in there, you're dead within 5 or 10 minutes. Okay? There's no question. That's extremely rare. Now, you have to talk about physics. It's very basic stuff. But if you inject a needle which is about 1 inch long into a muscle, along the way you're going to cut a number of blood vessels. Okay, remember, there's a blood vessel within reach of 1 or 2 cells everywhere. So if you're inserting that needle, you're going to cut vessels every time. Okay, every time, that's for sure. Now the physics of it is very simple. Now imagine how much pressure you're pushing, right? You're putting whatever 2 kilos of pressure or whatever on something which is big like that, but at the end is less than a millimeter. It's tiny. So the pressure differential that you have at the, I don't know if you call it the needle's tip versus any nearby blood vessel is enormous. It's enormous. The pressure is so big that if it's within reach, it'll go in. There's no question.
So what are the chances? So when you're saying that there's a blood vessel within like 1 or 2 cells anywhere in your muscle, anywhere in most of your body, there's a lot of tiny little arterioles, right? They're extremely tiny, right? Where like a single red blood cell is squeezing through them. Are you talking about like all of this that gets injected into the muscle being pushed into a bunch of these tiny arterioles? Or are you saying that, in some cases, maybe less than 5% of the time, you're going to be entering a larger artery of some size?
I don't want to go too much into the details of it because I fundamentally, I don't know. I know that that's feasible and it will happen. The question after that is a question of dose. Okay, so if you give a big shove, a big part of it, the size, of course you're right, the size of it, and how many there are, right? But remember, they're injecting you with 10 billion or 50, let's take Moderna, 40 billion of them. Okay. And I just told you that now with Moderna, it's 0.00001% can kill you. Okay, so the fact that it's tiny is not relevant. It's enough if it hits in the right place. The question
So
is,
if this tiny amount of it, you know, whatever it was, 60,000 nanoparticles or whatever, if that much gets in all at once into one of these blood vessels and travels along and it's all in one bolus and hits an organ or the aorta or whatever, that's
yeah,
what you're talking about.
it's got to be more than that, but because it gets diluted and stuff. But
Yeah,
I think
right.
it's much more. The problem is really not. Hear me out. You have a lot of people saying they have a taste, the immediate taste in the mouth, right? That's happening a ton. So if it's big enough that you taste it, it's big. Okay. So the problem is not trying to figure out, yeah, it can't happen, etc. It's happening. Okay, it's happening, and it's happening despite aspiration. Okay, so aspiration
But
is certain.
what explains the taste in the mouth again? I mean, is that like it's a metallic taste, right?
Yeah, but because it's metallic for COVID, but for trenbolone, for example, for bodybuilders that have that, they have something called Trenkov. When they have it, it's spicy. And there are some other guys. When I wrote I read a 1936 study from a guy who thought, I think it was called Wadcott with Poland, and it has another taste. The problem is not, I mean, I don't care about the taste. The problem is the only way for these particles to get to your tongue that fast is directly through the bloodstream. And it can't be that small if you can actually taste it. Okay? If you can actually taste it, it's not that small. Remember, they're injecting a tiny bit of it. So once you acknowledge that this is happening, actually, I'm wondering if not 100% of the dose are going IV to a degree or not, right? I'm even wondering that. They're not all harming, right? But I'm wondering if it's not happening all the time. Maybe most of the time it's happening the way you're saying, which is it's tiny through the vessels and it's harming the heart a tiny bit. As Dr. Mueller in Basel said, everybody's got a bit of damage to the heart, everybody. So is that just through an infused injection, or is it through a direct IV? It's most likely through a very small direct IV, okay? Otherwise, I don't see how it does it. So once you have acknowledged, and by the way, it's, you know, I'm not the only one saying that. Dentists have huge, you know, when you look at dentists, and people say, well, it's more vascularized than a muscle. I don't understand that. You know, a muscle is highly vascularized. Dentists, when they have up to 11% of the shots going IV when they were not doing aspiration. You know, all the vets, all the veterinarians, the vets are actually injecting vaccines with aspiration and very slow injection. All of them. Right? Because they can't kill, when they start vaccinating 1,000 cows, if they kill 10 or 100 of them, it shows. It shows. Okay, it shows. Right. So they're basically, what I'm saying is animals are better treated than humans. Okay. So the first point is, it's not a question. There's nothing to argue. This is happening, and it's been happening for a century. Now, let me be clear. I don't think, Sid, you've understood that. It's not limited to mRNA. Okay?
Yeah, I understand.
The attenuated vaccines do exactly the same thing. The virus-like vaccines like HPV do exactly the same thing. They penetrate cell, they hack the cell to a degree or another, and they get spotted and destroyed by the immune system. So what I'm talking about, and that's really a very important point. That's why I was really extremely vigorously against this whole spike theory, because the spike theory is basically saying, well, all the other vaccines are safe. They're not. What
the other vaccines, when you get a bolus of them, there's no transfection, the immune system's not destroying the cells. So what's
no, of course there is transfection. What are you talking about?
Okay, so there's transfection, but what, like, it's not expressing a foreign protein in the immune system coming in
Of
and
course
destroying.
it is an attenuated virus. It's going to express
Right, right, right.
that
Yeah,
a virus will express
yeah, yeah. No, you're right.
the
Yeah, of
pseudo,
course.
the
Yeah,
DNA, they're all doing it.
right.
And there's another, the only difference is with flu vaccines, protein vaccines, like the influenza vaccines. They are much less dangerous because they can kill cells, but by saturation, not by transfection. So it's not the immune system that's actually most likely not killing. It's just the fact that you're overwhelming a part of the body, and there's so much of that protein that you're actually killing those cells behind. That also can happen,
So why
but
are
it's
there
going to
so many
happen.
more VAERS? Yeah. Why are there so many more VAERS reports for these shots?
Well, for the reasons I've just told you, because of the if you have influenza, if you look, there's a beautiful study that was done in 2015 by Engler et al. Comparing influenza vaccines and smallpox, and it's like crazy. Smallpox got like almost 10% of vaccinated that has problems. It's like and influenza is extremely low. The reason is because the mechanism of harm of the cells is very different. In one case, it's the immune system killing. In the other case, it's most likely saturation. And saturation doesn't last that long. It's very short, and
Right.
they keep that.
Well, I mean, all the other vaccines in the childhood schedule, I mean, other than smallpox and the flu, right? You're comparing the worst vaccine in the past versus the one that's the least
Yeah,
harmful. But there's
yeah, HPV is dangerous. MMR is dangerous. The same.
right. But
Yep.
why is COVID so far off the charts high on the VAERS in the VAERS system?
Because it's the first time we inject a full age pyramid 3 times in a year at the same period. So when kids are born, we vaccinate them, 3 months, 4 months, whatever. So it spreads across a year and basically
Right.
becomes like a noise. And nobody's noticing it. I mean, except for the mother, but it's sort of a noise. Here, what we've done is we've concentrated it both in terms of age groups, since you have all the age groups instead of having one class or maybe 2 or 3 classes, and we've concentrated over time. So it's basically showing what's been hidden for years.
Haven't there been other vaccines that rolled out and then, it was newly created vaccine and then everyone gets it all at once? That hasn't happened before?
It's happened, but they've always stopped them.
Hmm.
It's happened, and they've always stopped them. Now, the there's I have 11 different mechanisms of harm, but there's on the transfecting side, the cytotoxic side, what you have is it creates endothelial damage in a varieties of severity. Okay, so if it really rips away the entire endothelium, and if it's close to, for example, it's in the aorta, if there's a lot of pressure, repair is going to be impossible. The layer underneath, the smooth layer, is going to basically slowly erode over 4 or 5 months, and then you're going to have an arterial rupture or an arterial dissection. Okay, that's very clear. After that, you have what you're seeing is basically there's so much damage across the vascular system that we've never evolved for that. And so what happens is that most likely the repair elements, the growth factor, the coagulation factor, the circulating endothelial stem cells, etc., they get monopolized elsewhere, right? And so you start having problems, and you have 4 problems. The first one is you're going to have so much damage that it's going to create a huge demand for coagulation, right? For which we've never evolved, and therefore you're going to have all those thrombosis, microembolism, etc. Can be extremely high in the veins if it's or extremely high at a local level, at the organ level. but that's exactly the same thing, is too much demand for coagulation, and the inhibitors of coagulation are just overwhelmed, right? They cannot compensate. We have coagulation inhibitor everywhere, but that explains why some people, when they extract the blood coalesces almost immediately, coagulates almost immediately. So that's the first part. The second one, I already talked about aneurysm. The third one is the fact that you will have because of too much demand, basically you're going to have crystallization, because the inhibitors of calcification are the endothelium cells. If they're destroyed, you don't have inhibitors anymore, and so you're going to have these plaques. Sorry. That happens very, very quickly, right? In a study that was done in Hong Kong, within a day, a heart was well calcified. Okay, so you're going to have calcification, and after that, arteriosclerosis. Okay, I believe most of the arteriosclerosis that exists today in the U.S. is actually vaccine caused. Most of it. I don't see how, all the literature I've read talks about an insult to the endothelium, and an insult to the endothelium is massive damage that kills so much endothelium that there's not enough calcification inhibitors anymore, and so calcification occurs. So that's the third point. After that, you also have misguided growth allocations. So you have, of course, you're damaging, and you have growth factors, VEGF, that coming demands to basically rebuild, just like when you scratch yourself. Now, if ever you get too much growth factors coming in because the body is asking for it into an area, it's going to start producing new blood vessels in area they're not supposed to. And what you're going to have is fistula, you're going to have angiomas, all these weird things happening, right? And it's just basically a disbalance in the repair because of the overwhelming damage that's being done. Okay, I think EGF. Have I forgotten something? Let me just check on this side.
So it was huge amounts of coagulation. The second one was endothelial damage.
Yeah, the second one is endothelial damage. No, endothelial damage is always there. It's the head. It's the title basically. But after that, basically you have the homeostasis, the balance that's off. Right, and so the factors are off. Either there's overwhelming factors, coagulation, growth. There's a fourth one. Sorry, I'm doing too much. Yeah. So you have overwhelming coagulation factor, too high blood pressure. That's going to be an aneurysm. You're going to have lack of calcification inhibitors that lead to arteriosclerosis, aortic valve calcification, placenta calcification, thyroid calcification. And then you're going to have misdirected growth factors with angiomas, also arteriosclerosis to a certain degree, and fistulas. That's really the damage related to the disbalance. And after that, in the organs, you're going to have two problems. You're going to have necrosis caused by ischemia or thrombosis. Okay, basically you're depleting the organ of its blood, and therefore cells are going to die, right? And sometimes it's going to be the entire. I have a friend who lost his gallbladder, was completely dead, entirely dead, completely necrosed, and sometimes it's going to be part of it, right? And when that occurs, if it's an endocrine gland, if it's a gland producing hormones where you're not going to produce enough hormones anymore, right? It explains very well a hyposecretion in endocrine disorders, right? It explains ulcers. It explains people becoming blind, etc. And then there's one of the big I mean, there's a few big discoveries in the bolus area, but one of them is microperforation. So you need to imagine the bolus hits with different degrees of severity as it goes downstream to the organs, it disseminates. And so the damage is not always going to be, rampage. It's just going to poke holes into the vascular system. And for the same reasons, maybe the stem cells are not going to be able to repair. It's because the damage is too big or because they're monopolized somewhere else. And there you have it. You basically have a blood tissue barrier that is leaky, right? And the concept applies body-wide, right? Why? Because the blood tissue barriers are also a beautiful gift of evolution, right? They protect our brain, the BBB. They select the right nutriments in the blood-breast milk barrier for the babies. They regulate hormones, or they regulate immune cells in the bone marrow, etc. So if any one of these barriers is disrupted, especially is disrupted for life, you're going to have leaks. And that is I wrote a piece 18 months ago on that, which is when you look at neurodegenerative disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MSI, ALS, you name it, systematically, the literature shows you that it's actually a leaky BBB that's causing it. It's not, it's the location of the leak that dictates the illness. It's not, and the leak.
But why would it never? Why would they never be healed? These microperforations. I mean, why would it just persist indefinitely?
Because they're big. Because they're big. They're big, and also most likely because your body doesn't produce stem cells for the sake of producing stem cells. And at one point, either notably in the brain, but in some other areas, you could see it's happening. I mean, if you look at I wrote a piece recently where I realized I just finished my book. I'm looking for an editor or a publisher, and I had completely missed out on obesity. I lived in the U.S. in the 70s, and there's no obesity, and junk food existed already. I'm sorry, we ate, popsicles and burgers, and there was no Diet Cokes or anything. And the poor were still eating the same junk, and they were not obese. So it's not junk food. And one of the things one of my hypotheses, actually it's not a hypothesis because it's validated in the literature, is that obesity is tied to a leaky gut. But what's a leaky gut? A leaky gut is exactly what I'm talking about. We've actually poked holes into the gut blood barrier, and basically the barrier that's supposed to select what the body needs is letting in anything. And therefore, an explanation to obesity. Of course, if you eat appropriately, you're not going to be obese. But if you're not eating appropriately, then your body's not saving your life anymore, right? So it's socially not very fair. But this microperforation aspect is extremely, extremely important because it explains hypersecretion of hormones. Because if people have been saying, oh, you're overproducing hormones. You're not overproducing hormones. What you actually is, you're over-releasing hormones. You're actually not, you're not controlling, because you've destroyed the barrier. You've destroyed nature's evolution to actually regulate hormones, and that explains endometriosis also, because it's letting in hormones in areas it's not supposed to. It explains. I mean, it's just it's just completely crazy, the number of things that.
Yeah, I mean, leaky gut. I mean, I can understand maybe some tissues wouldn't regenerate, but the gut regenerates, right? So I still don't get, don't you need some sort of ongoing attack in the gut, like some sort of autoimmune attack, in order to explain a persistent leaky gut that doesn't heal over time? I mean,
No,
it's a surface tissue. I mean, it should be up in
no,
a few days.
you got it wrong. It's not surface tissue. It's the surface of your blood vessels. It's not surface tissue. It's a bit different. It's the exchange layer. Okay, it's the exchange layer. If you poked holes in them, you poke holes, and you're going to have inflammation because you've got stuff getting in that's not supposed to be in contact, right? You're going to have gluten. You're going to have gluten in there that's not supposed to. Gluten's supposed to be digested, to be broken down and eaten up much lower down. If you have a hole there, you're going to have celiac disease. You're going to have all of these things. It's very clear. It's very clear from, for example, maternal milk poisoning. I predicted that would happen 18 months ago or 19 months ago, because I said, oh, this is very simple, guys. We've opened up the doors, okay? This is like saying, okay, well, your apartment is filled with riches here, but the doors are broken down. Nobody's going to come in. Of course, somebody's going to come in and drop stuff in or steal away your material. We've destroyed that. Now, the good news is actually that can be solved. Okay, that can be solved. And we'll talk about it a bit later. So, what's crazy is this has been happening and this explains the explosion of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, endocrine disorders, obesity, infertility in the Western world of these past 30 years or 40 years. Now, that's for the immune mediated part of the Bolus theory. There's another part of the Bolus theory which I had missed for a very long time, but I've been on to it for the past year now, and that's the part that's related to genes. I had many conversations with Jessica Rose, with Alexandra Orion-Coud here in Paris, and everybody was very, very scared of what's happening to potentially gene integration and all that for the past, and they've been for 3 years have been saying that couldn't happen, and that was very, very serious. And I was like, I don't see how that happened because all the cells are supposed to be destroyed, right? And that's true. Fundamentally, if the vaccine is well injected, most of the cells that are going to be transfected, or not all the cells that are transfected, are going to be carrying MHCs. They're going to be sensitive to the immune system and destroyed. Now, when I worked in cancer 4 or 5 years ago, I had read a piece whereby I had realized that the bone marrow was extremely immune privileged. So it was basically protected from the immune system. And I had read about it and basically understood that the stem cells are immune privileged. It sort of makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint. You don't want to destroy your jewels, right? It's your genetic material, the most precious. You need it every day to produce your immune cells, to produce your blood cells, and to produce your regeneration of cells. So it makes sense that you don't treat them like you're treating a normal cell that you can. So basically, what the body does is, or what evolution has done is, it's put it aside, away in the bone marrow and in niches in the endothelium, and it's giving them special rights versus the immune system, i.e., the immune system, they're untouchable. The immune system could not touch them. Now, the question I had earlier this year is like, well, hold on a second. What happens if a cell like that gets transfected? Okay, we know how the immune system deals with that. It kills the cells normally, but it can't do it. So, we certainly haven't evolved for that. Okay, so what's the mechanism? And and I dove in the book I just finished. I investigated that quite a lot, and here's what's interesting. If you know ROS, reactive oxygen species, if you have an over oxygenation of a stem cells, what the stem cell does is it replicates very quickly. Actually, that's the way stem cells regenerate, right? It gets a signal. It gets a signal. For example, when we do sports, we hyperventilate with too much oxygen. That triggers a multiplication, a replication of stem cells. And so, imagine if a stem cell is transfected by the vaccine, and the vaccine starts hacking it. Well, that's the only conjecture in my entire theory. Okay? The rest is all proven. That's my only conjecture, but it's sort of makes a lot of sense. Well, it would make sense from an evolutionary standpoint that the stem cell does what it does best, which is split and replicate, dilute the poison as soon as you can. Now, what happens then when there are two things that happens? One thing is you've built a new infrastructure of stem cells that is excessive, right? We have all a fixed, numbered hierarchy of stem cells for our needs. If you send a message for a request for stem cell, for regenerative stem cells, and you've got 10 cooks in the kitchen, you're going to have 10 burgers. In other words, you're going to have a tumor, okay? and if ever, and so here I have in my theory, I'm putting completely cancer theory upside down. What you're going to have is, if you hit a high-ranking stem cell, that is, of course, when it scales a lot, you're going to have these high-grade cancer. If you hit a low-end stem cells, you're going to have a low-grade cancer. Makes a lot of sense. Now, the other part, which is really scary, especially in the perspective that they vaccinated pregnant women, is the whole genetic side. So remember, stem cells, what they do is replicate. What happens when a cell replicates? Well, the nucleus dissolves, right? The genes, the chromosomes are accessible, and it's okay if they're accessible because normally a stem cell is pure, it's clean. There's nothing to miscalibrate it. There's nothing to bind to it. It's just the stem cell. But now imagine that you've put proteins and you've put stuff in between. You have a spike there. It's like, okay, so you have this calibration in the anaphase where the chromosomes are supposed to split from each other. I never remember the term there. It's a beautiful term. Well, if you block it, then you're gonna have two chromosomes instead of having one. You're gonna have trisomy, and on the other side, you're gonna have monosomy. So depending on which one is the senior one or the junior one, it's going to be a monosomy or trisomy, and then you're going to have, of course, if you start having proteins binding to the chromosome, you're going to have translations. You're going to have breakups. It's going to break a chromosome. So basically, you have, what I'm saying is. And of course, if you have DNA, you're going to have DNA integration. Okay. It's just you don't need to even talk about SV40. You don't need to talk about that bullshit because fundamentally it's open. It's there. Okay. Now, one thing I forgot about cancer. I forgot the most important thing. When you look at the features of a cancer cell, right? Oops, my battery's dying. This is not good. Give me 2 seconds. Charge my. Oops. Thankfully, I saw that. Sorry for that. When you look at the features of a cancer cell, they're self-renewing, they're eternal, they're immune privileged, they don't have MHCs, okay? Often they don't have MHCs, most of the time they don't have MHCs. They use glycolysis, right? Their fuel is sugar, okay? They have mid-bodies, etc. When you look at the feature of stem cells, you have all of that. And you have P53 inhibition, okay? You have all of that. So what I'm basically saying is, and I'm not the only one, because fundamentally when I started seeing that, it says, well, hold on a second. So basically, cancer is created when we contaminate a stem cell. That's what this is saying. And once you've understood that, well, mathematically, it's much more likely that this is happening versus a normal cell that would need to reacquire all those mutations by chance. It's mathematically impossible. It's mathematically impossible. And when you start looking at the literature, Sid, and you look for a cancer cell of origin, you fall on stem cells. There's a whole lot of research in the past 20 years of researchers have been saying, look, guys, cancer cells are stem cells. It's obvious. But nobody's been trying to figure out why that is occurring. Because here we get to ground that's a bit scary. Why? Because we've evolved for cancer not to happen commonly. And therefore, how come cancer is happening commonly? That means it's human-made. It's man-made, okay? So it doesn't mean it's always a bolus, right? Because, for example, I wrote a piece on mammography. Clearly, when you look at the hierarchy of cancer, breast cancer being so high for a small organ that only touches half of the population makes no sense. It can't be bolus theory. It can't be only vaccines. Vaccines certainly are a big chunk of it, okay? But there are other ways, like mammographies. And prostate cancer also is very, very high, strangely, for a 25-gram gland. That shouldn't have that level of cancers, just by the exposure of the endothelium. So this is, I mean, I've outlined the bolus theory. The bolus theory is that we start by bypassing our natural defenses, okay? The vascular system architecture and all of that. And then there's two ways. There harm done to cells that are sensitive to the immune systems, and then harm done to cells that are immune privileged, to stem cells. And there you have basically, what I've described: cardiovascular system, illnesses, aneurysm, high blood pressure, arteriosclerosis, misdirected growth factor, angioma, etc. And then you have, of course, you've destroyed organs, or you've maimed, or if you've harmed them, or destroyed part of it. That's going to reduce its function. Or you've actually destroyed the barrier, and you're letting in stuff that's not supposed to get in for a good reason, and you're letting out stuff that's not supposed to get out. And then you have cancer, which is, I mean, frankly, I don't see how it could be happening differently. It's extremely robust and extremely, when you have a theory and when you don't say, oh, a second, so now I can explain why you have, I have at least a hypothesis that makes sense, why you have high-grade cancer and low-grade cancer. Now, I want to tell you something that happened to me when I started writing the book. on autism. Because I'm, you probably see behind there, I'm fascinated by the brain, but I haven't been working on it for some time, and I had always left out autism because it's a rabbit hole. It's just too complicated. I don't do stuff that I know I'm not going to bring any value to. So I had left it apart and said, this is a growing brain, and we're causing damage in there. Who knows how it's going to evolve? There's too many confounding factors. But I decided to test my theory and to have trust in all those moms that said, look, my kid was normal, and when you vaccinated him, he had autism. So I said, okay, what is Bolus theory? Bolus theory is you have this swarm of particles that's in your bloodstream, and it's going to go and hit. But it's not only going to hit the amygdala and cause autism. It's going to cause other things. So sometimes it's going to hit the amygdala and another part of the brain.
Can you start over? We had a hiccup with
5 words.
Sorry.
You pronounce
the internet. We lost you for like 10, 15 seconds. Can you start over with the autism?
Yeah. So yeah, I was telling you, I'm not sure. So when I started my book in May, I decided to test my theory on autism. I knew nothing about autism, literally nothing. But I'm very confident in the Bolus theory, and I wanted to trust all these moms who had problems with their kids and said, I had a normal kid prior to the vaccines, and after that, I had a kid that had real issues. So you need to understand one hallmark of the Bolus theory is the fact that it's chaotic. So it's going to go and hit here and there, hit and here. It's not, it's not like it's laser focused and always hitting the same place. Therefore, if your amygdala has been hit, it means you've had a bolus, and therefore the probability is going to be much higher that you're going to have other places hit than other people who haven't. And so I listed basically 40 hypotheses that needed to be true for autism to be vaccine injured and for Bolus theory to be true. Basically, I listed, I said, well, okay, so they're supposed to have all the endocrine disorders. So I listed like 10 different hormones, and they're going to have hyposecretion and hypersecretion, like 20 already. Boom. Then I said, okay, well, the bolus is going to hit, and they're going to have more Parkinson, and they're going to have more Alzheimer's, and they're going to have had a stroke before, more than others. Then I said, okay, well, it's going to hit the ears and the eyes, so they'll have more blindness, more visual, hearing impairments. Then I said, okay, well, sometimes it's going to also hit elsewhere. So it's going to have congenital heart disease. It's going to have celiac disease. It's going to have digestive problems or constipation. It's going to have leaky gut. It's going to have joint problems, skin problems, bone problems. What else? It's going to have cancer, more cancer, and of course, it's going to have more genetic than others. 40, okay, all of them came positive, 100%, 40. Now, when was the last time that you, not knowing anything about a very complex problem like autism, it's very problem, and how can you say, okay, well, I'm going to list 40 hypotheses and I'm sure they're going to be true? Zero. The chance of that happening by chance is 1 in 1.1 trillion. 40 choices is 1.1 trillion. So that's, for me, is a very strong validation of the Bolus theory. And it's also very interesting because it explains why these autistic children have all these other illnesses, right? They have them all. And it's for the first time, I could say to, I don't know, I think I'm the only one person in the world right now that can say, okay, well, you want to understand why autistic children have more genetic disease? I can tell you why. Or because stem cells, because of that, or why they have more problems with constipation. It's not genetic. It has nothing to do. It can't be genetic. If it were genetic, it would be much more, laser focused, and it would stay that way. The fact that it's completely everywhere, but it's systematically everywhere, shows that it is what's happening. It doesn't necessarily mean it's always a vaccine. It could also be maybe an anesthetic, maybe it's a vitamin. I mean, again, the Bolus theory is I build it on the mRNA vaccine and then on the vaccines, but you realize that it applies to bee venom, right? You get injected in the muscle, nothing happened. You get injected in the vein, you die within 5 minutes. Okay, it's extremely consistent, and it's very clear to me that vaccines are the number one driver of harm, because that's the ones being generalized, the most shots, etc. But you could have. I had a reader on my Substack who had an injection in the ear, and she's got a tinnitus now. In the teeth at the dentist, she had an anesthesia at the dentist, and now she has hearing problems. So anesthesia does this, can harm also. But the dynamics might be slightly different, but the outcome is exactly the same thing. It's basically poisoning by bypassing your natural defenses.
Mm.
Have I lost you, or are you?
No. So just going back to this, it could be anything that you inject, like a vitamin, for example, or medication, or, when you're going to the dentist, they're injecting something that, a numbing agent, in your mouth.
Contrast agent also. There's a huge accidents with contrast agents.
Right. So you're saying, okay, so because it's a large bolus of something, but like, I mean, so numbing agents, for example, I mean, are those harmful? Like, I guess if it's hitting vasculature is when it's going to be harmful, but you don't expect it to be harmful in your, inside your mouth where it's supposed to remain. But you're saying if it goes intravascularly, it could be damaging the endothelium.
Of course, it's endothelium or the capillaries, when they can block the capillaries and necrose behind. It's the same.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so going back to the prostate cancer and other cancers that are higher than you would expect, with mammograms, maybe you're talking about radiation. What about prostate cancer and others?
Okay, so first of all, there need to understand the way I view this with the Bolus theory is exposure, right? So basically, the bigger the organ, the higher the exposure, with a little caveat with the stem cell density, right? So it's a sort of 2x2 matrix, right? But clearly, prostate cancer and breast cancer are off the charts. Right? They shouldn't be. They're compared to lungs, for example, lungs should be way above, or even colon, which is very big. Colon should be it's exposed to bacteria. It's extremely big and large. Something's wrong. So yeah, on the mammograms, I reacted. Actually, it was a funny article I wrote in like an hour or so. I reacted because I read, what they were telling to women. So I said, well, don't worry about it. You're getting 0.3 sieverts, and you're getting, normally you're getting like 3 or 4 a year or something. And I was like, hold on a second, that's manipulation. Now I know about doses and concentration. It's exactly the same. It's the same thing as the bolus, right? So I was like, hold on a second, something's wrong here. So I calculated, basically said, okay, so basically, breasts are like 200 grams each, so maybe 400 grams. So you're giving 0.3 sievers to 400 grams in a second, versus full bodies of, let's say, 65 kilos is getting 4 over a year. and and so when you do the cup, I made a calculation. It might change by weight, but basically I had 400 million times a higher dose. 400 million times. I said, well, hold on a second. We've never evolved for having a dose of radiation 400 times higher, right? And so it's very it's very possible that either you destroy the cell, or if it's a stem cell, you actually trigger the same phenomenon of what I call I call it hold on a second. I call it evasion by replication, right? And I think that's what's happening now in prostate cancer. I must say, not an expert in that. Never done it, but I, presumably, there are agents in the product that with which they manipulate your prostate. It's very possible that if it gets into it contaminates the stem cell the same way. The stem cell is not saying, hey, this is poison, etc. It's like, oh, I'm getting fat, or I'm getting some product. It's just reacting to it, and then it's inside and it splits, but it's still breaking down and creating chaos. We've been playing apprentice here, sorcerer, to a certain extent, but it's very clear that
if there was something like a foreign, like a product being put in, women put products in their vagina, gay men, have a lot of gay sex with like a lubricant. You're talking about lubrication, right? For the digital rectal exam?
Yeah, but maybe you're right, and it's a very good point you're making. The only difference is those two other areas are experts at flushing things. They're constantly being aggressed and stuff. They're made to be isolated. First of all, to do that, because and so the stem cells are most likely more protective. So it has to be something like. Anyhow, that's really not the Bolus theory. That's completely off, and I don't want to focus too much on that because it's really an area I fell recently into, literally, and it just didn't make sense. It's in my book I have an analogy of the meteorites analogy. If you would start finding 10% of the meteorites in the world in Hawaii, you would wonder, the exposure of Hawaii is tiny compared to the whole surface of the world. You would expect most of the meteorites in the world be either in the sea or in Russia because it's the largest exposure. It's the same thing with cancer, exactly the same thing.
So you had mentioned that veterinarians have figured this out apparently, and they do slow injections. Do you how slow is the injection?
They aspirate, and I think they do inject too slowly, but I'm not sure. But I know I've read a few cases when an accident had occurred, and the veterinarian school had actually looked into it, and I found case reports of that. So yeah, they watch out, and they've known also about cancer. They've known about cancer for some time. So cat sarcoma is quite famous. And is likely related to the same thing, not to a bolus, but most likely at injection.
You can't just, it's not just the aspiration, it's the speed with which you inject. So do you think that if you aspirate and you inject, say, over a minute or two, that you completely bypass this problem with vaccines, or do you need an entirely different route of administration?
Well, it's clear that I would go for at least 2 minutes. 1 minute is there's a case of a kid. I don't know if you read the story of. It's a very sad story of a 6-year-old. I think he was called Milo Edberg. He is called. Hopefully, he's still alive. He had a blood port installed because he had blood sugar issues, and it needed to be taken quite often. And and the day he did that, the doctor convinced his mom to vaccinate him, and the guy injected him directly into the bloodstream, which is yeah, I know. It's you have now the guy knew he was doing something stupid because the kid didn't die. I mean, he didn't do like that. He likely did it slowly. He likely did it slowly, and he still had. I think I'm not sure he was paralyzed or not, but he had myocarditis. He had major lung problems. He was in a coma for a few months, and I think he's paralyzed. So, I wouldn't. I would do it as small as slow as possible. Now, the there's a few ways that the public health authorities can actually work on this. I had looked into that for cancer because I had compared delivery mechanisms for the company I had been working for. It's completely idiotic to inject into the muscle. It's stupid. It's stupid from numbers because you need to inject a ton of them to find dendritic cells. There are no dendritic cells in the muscles, or hardly any. So if you want to find dendritic cells, go and find it in the skin. Right? It's loaded with dendritic cells. So there are ways with patches, with pressure guns, where you can find dendritic cells if you want to do that, and do it in the skin. And if you do that, you likely can reduce the dose by a factor of 100 or 1,000. Okay, so that would already be quite significant in terms of lowering the dangers. After that, again, things need to be tested. I don't like talking about. I think I'm just telling you conceptually. But what's interesting is what the bodybuilders did. Okay, I wrote a piece almost 2 years ago now on bodybuilders saying, maybe the WHO should consult with them because they've come up with. So they have a protocol, and the protocol is following. So they aspirate, but aspiration is not foolproof at all. It's like you still have like 2%, at least 2% detectable in the cough. Okay, so probably more than that, 3 or 4% with aspiration. So it's not foolproof. After that, they do it extremely slowly, over 2 minutes at least, extremely slowly. The second thing is they dilute as much as possible, and they reduce the dose as much as possible. And I think, was there something else? No, I think that's it. So there are ways to do it. And of course, another way is to not vaccinate, but that's a different story. But
right. I mean, diluting it is the opposite of what you want to do, since you're injecting into a muscle and you're trying to trigger an immune response. If you dilute it too much, obviously you're going to end.
If you dilute it, it's not good. If you dilute it, it's not
good. Trying to get from it.
No, I mean, you can find Moderna and biotech have been having really bad response rates on their anti-cancer vaccines, very bad, because they're injecting the muscle. It's completely stupid. I'm sorry. They're investing billions or tens of billions of dollars in stuff, and they don't do the basics right. So I'm sorry, that's a bit arrogant on my end. But,
sounds ridiculous. Yeah. You had mentioned something about maybe solving the leaky barrier problem. So was the issue that you have constant inflammation because of what's passing through the leaky barriers?
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing. If you have a neuropathy, for example, what is neuropathy? Well, you have a leaky, you have a leaky endothelium in the nerves, right? And so the endothelium is no longer protecting the nerve, right? And of course, it's supposed to be extremely protected because it's signaling. Right? It's like a data center where you would start putting trash in it. A data center wouldn't work very, very long. It's exactly the same thing. What and that's also the reason why people who fast have extremely good results. Why? Because their metabolic waste is depleted from the bloodstream, and therefore they're not polluting their areas. So you see, it's consistent. So one way, I must say that a few months ago, I was a bit not depressed, but a bit sad, because I was like, okay, I understand what's happening, but I don't have any solution. So the only solution I had, and I have two friends who have Parkinson's, was just to tell them, look, you need to try and fast as much as you can, and to keep your immune system as high as you can, right? So that the trash is taken out as fast as possible, and that you limit the trash in. That was true for neuropathies and for a lot of these issues. But I didn't have a solution. I went into stem cell therapy. I looked into that, and there's some extremely interesting and positive trials. So that was interesting, even though I don't think that's the future. I mean, frankly speaking, it's extremely expensive. It's a bit dangerous. And in some cases, to the practice, you start, putting immunosuppressants. So for me, it's another one of those where you're doing more harm than you're solving. But what was really interesting is to try and understand, in all the work I've done, I know that stem cells can repair that. And let me tell you, you probably know the story of a microchimerism. You see what that is? No, if you don't know. Chimerism. Microchimerism. It's basically it's a beautiful. It's actually one of the rare beautiful things I have to say on these really sad topics. When a mother is pregnant, what happens? Yeah. What happens is
chimerism. Sorry, yeah, chimerism.
Yeah. You have you have circulating stem cells from the baby that during those 9 months circulate back and forth from the baby to the mom, and that actually repair the mom. And so how do we know that? Well, we found some Y chromosomes in the brains of women. They're not supposed to have Y chromosomes. So basically, their son repaired them. Of course, their daughters also most likely repaired them, but harder to detect. But what's interesting is there's two things. One, they have less neurodegenerative disease, less Alzheimer's, which means that they're being repaired. There's no reason they're being repaired more often. And therefore, it means that stem cells naturally can solve this. It also means that it does that over time, 9 months. Okay? Doesn't mean it took the entire 9 months, but it certainly wasn't done in a day. So so I investigated stem cell therapies, both that and then I looked into hyperbaric oxygen therapy. It just so happened I had worked in oxygen when I was a young professional, so I'm very familiar with oxygen gases and stuff like that, and not only medical gases because I sold them, so I looked into the science, and basically I found out about this Ross splitting and how it works. So I was like, okay, very interesting. So they're using oxygen, hyperoxygenation of the blood, to actually trigger a replication of stem cells, and those stem cells are go on to repair. And of course, when you look at it, it doesn't work immediately, right? And so a lot of test trials are being done like, oh, we did 2 hours and didn't do anything, okay? Which is like, okay, I know who paid you. But when you look at the trials that are done over 40 hours, then you have some pretty amazing results, right? You have people being cured of Parkinson, you have reductions in Alzheimer's, you have amazing results on autism, you have etc. And now what's really interesting is that I think I can expand that because very few people would think of doing that for endocrine disorder, for example. But if you have hypersecretion, well, most likely an oxygen therapy would actually solve that, right? Again, not in a day or two, but over time, over 2 months, over 40 sessions of HBOT. Now, the problem with HBOT is there's only 150 sites in the US. There's a very limited infrastructure. And now there are other people who are using other technologies, but one very basic one, which is to say, well, HBOT only increases, or maybe a 1.6 or 1.7 times. So basically, if instead of saying 1 hour of HBOT every day, which is very complicated to fit into anybody's professional lives, how about breathing 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour at night? So basically, when you're at home, when you wake up, you breathe oxygen for an hour. When you come back home at night, you breathe pure oxygen for an hour. And if you do that for 2 months, theoretically, you're cured. You're cured. So what's really interesting about that is, one, oxygen is widely available. Two, you could almost overhaul the health of the entire US population or Western world population at a very, very cheap price. Now, the problem with all that is it's going to put a lot of people out of business. A lot of doctors, a lot of doctors are going to be out of business. But you can imagine a world. What the view I have is that you can imagine a world where actually doctors are being paid to keep you really healthy, and the more people they keep them healthy, the richer they become. Right? You can completely just change the dynamics, right? And a doctor who do that today could go to a healthcare system, to the insurance companies and say, well, you know what? My guys are not going to cost you peanut. You're going to make tons of money, and that's it. I think that has to happen. Otherwise, I wrote a very gloomy piece of article a few months ago, a month ago. When you simulate first of all, when you look at the age pyramid and the damage that's already been done in the U.S., you can see why you have 66 million people who are disabled in the U.S. And it maps the clinical the people who are clinically armed with the ones that are not clinically subclinically armed. In my calculation, it's spot in the middle. It's amazing. So if we continue, if the system continues to be dystopic or dystopian like it is right now, it's the end of civilization. Literally. We can't. You can't. The society cannot sustain further harm. It's gonna. When you have like 45%, 50% of the adults above 45 in the U.S. who have arteriosclerosis, it's crazy. When you have 10% of the adults with neurodegenerative disease, it's visible at 65, but the reality of it is it's there at 40. Just the immune system is doing its work. So if Bill Gates continues and the system continues, if they pass on these mRNA shots for flu vaccines, it's a disaster. I mean, the simulation is a real disaster. Everybody is going to be sick. Everybody. The simulation I had, I think I wrote a piece of paper. I don't know if you have it there, but I wrote. It was like more than 2/3 of the Americans would be sick, literally clinically ill. Okay, that's what's ongoing right now, and actually, the 20% of people who are not getting vaccinated because they don't want to are actually bringing a better picture than it would be. If you would take these guys out, you would have a very, very dim, gloomy picture. We need to stop this. We need to stop. And all because the injection protocol is not complied with. Okay. No, if you go to BioNTech or Moderna and say, is it a problem if we inject directly into the bloodstream? They will go, whoa, whoa, whoa. No way. Okay. So the protocol is tissue. It's not, the reality is protocol is not intramuscular. It's in intratissue versus intravascular. Okay. And so by my calculation, my estimation, I triangulated it multiple ways. It took me some time to do that. I think about 1 in 20 goes IV, or at least goes IV in a serious way. And when you look at what, for example, the numbers that Muller showed for the heart is very close to that. When you look at the Engler et al. Data, where they have 10% of the people after smallpox who have subclinical and clinical myocarditis, it's also very close to that. So whichever way you take it, it's not 1 in 10,000. It's more 1 in 20. And so if you get 80 shots like kids in the US get by the time you're 80, just do the math. You're almost certain to be clinically harmed. It's probabilistic. Everybody's going to get harmed. That's why, I mean, it really, I think we're getting to a point at the end of a dystopia, and where the reality is going to kick in big time. I'm to tell you the truth, I'm very surprised I'm the one who wrote this, who discovered the Bolus theory. And people knew it was harming, but then they stopped. I went and I did the entire work in detail to try and understand what's happening. And I had a conversation with my friend Michael Leavitt, Professor Leavitt from Stanford University, Nobel Prize in Chemistry. I presented him with my theory about a month and a half ago. Spent 90 minutes with him. He took notes. He didn't comment at the science. Basically, he said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, it's quite simple, actually." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm an MBA. I can be very rigorous about things, but I can't go too far." I have gone pretty far, but so it's pretty, and the autism example I share with you makes it extremely compelling. There's no question that happened by chance, by luck. Everything contrary to spike protein theory or certain, I've anchored everything on observation, right? And one element I haven't talked about is one fundamental observation, and that is that some people are harmed and some people aren't. People say, "Oh, they're all going to die." That's not true. First of all, I hate scaremongering. That's not true. Not everybody's going to die, and not everybody's damaged. I had my son, I have 3 grown-up sons. One of them was overworked, and he thought he was vaccine injured. I had his blood work done, and he was pristine. He didn't have any D-dimer or anything. He was fine. So we need to, once you've acknowledged that, I've known that for almost 3 years now. I've anchored this, and I said, okay, some people are harmed, some people aren't, right? And the other thing that people need to realize and acknowledge is that all the vaccines have exactly the same adverse events, all of them. So if that's the case, it can't be anything else than what's common. And what is common is intramuscular delivery, right? And if some are harmed and some aren't, it means that something is happening in the intravascular delivery and a difference. And by the way, then you go and you test on animals. And there's been one test in Hong Kong, one test in Munich, and there has been many tests before with pseudoviruses on rabbits and mice, And intravascularly, they create and replicate the exact same adverse events. So Bolus theory is not only completely structured and detailed and explained and consistent from a scientific standpoint, it's also replicable and tested on animals. No, spike theory, circulating spike theory is not. There's billions of people who have had spike, and they're fine. They're fine. So it saddens me because people who are supposed to be, more on the reality team, are actually not being, truthful and not being anchored in reality and looking at observing the facts. And it's only by observing the facts and sticking to it that you don't go haywire.
The issue for me is that it's quite suspicious, right? Because what you're saying makes a lot of sense, but if you blame spike protein, it lets them off the hook, and you just continue creating more of these shots, and you continue having the same.
Exactly. And that's why I've been very vocal against it, because that's exactly what will happen. I don't. This is much bigger than COVID vaccine. This is the entire health of our population, and this is disrupting the health of our kids. Okay, I explain sudden infant death syndrome. I explain autism, and it explains it in a way that we should have put Toyota guys to solve this 3 years ago. They would have solved this in 3 days. 3 days with access to data. For me, it took me a little more time. But fundamentally, when you apply the root cause analysis, and by the way, some people understood something was wrong. I mean, there's a reason why Denmark decided to reinstate aspiration in March 2021. There's a reason Hong Kong did that also. Germany did it also, but a year later. So it's not like this. I'm not First of all, I'm not alone talking about that. Where I'm alone is I'm the only one that actually has done the work and has gone. I worked 9,000 hours on this. Basically, it's not like it fell on me. I pruned everything to get to the big picture.
Yeah, and you're publicizing it. I mean, all these countries, they obviously have some idea of what's going on, but they're not saying anything.
I don't know if they understand what's going on. I don't understand if they understand that it's been an accident in terms of the way it's injected. I'm not so sure they understand that. Because if that's the case, they could have solved it long ago. And it's too damaging. I think what's happened is that it was very clear from theirs that something was happening in January 15th of January 2021. You look at VAERS, the available data is overwhelming already. They could have stopped it then, but what they did is not that. They doubled down, tripled down, and that's the part that's criminal. Really, that's the part that's criminal. Whoever did that is a betrayed his nation and his people for sure.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about the hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Why do you think doing it for 1 hour twice a day for 2 months theoretically would cure a lot of people of their chronic illnesses? Why that specific dose and time?
So I said two things. HBOT 40 session 1 hour a day. Okay, but it's hyperbaric. It's constraint. It's a huge constraint. You need to go stay there for an hour in a chamber. There aren't so many chambers, so it's going to be very complicated. What I'm proposing is what is called normobaric. So basically, you breathe in pure oxygen like you would have in any hospital or at home or in concentrators, and you would actually simulate the same thing by having a longer period of time stimulating stem cells.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So your question was, why do I think it's going to work?
I mean, the time period and the amount. I mean, did you figure out that this
Yeah, because
like 1 hour, 2 hours a day of pure oxygen is going to deliver the same as 1 hour of
Yeah,
hyperbaric oxygen therapy?
yeah, about. I mean, roughly, it's about that. Again, damage can be different for different people. Okay, so some people can be harmed more, and so the reconstruction work might take longer than for some. What is clear is the results are amazing. You have some people whose eyes are being rebuilt, or retinas are being rebuilt, or and I've in my book I've listed a number of studies, and most of the studies that I found with results had 40 sessions. That doesn't mean actually you don't need to do more. Maybe you can actually also repair organs doing that progressively. Frankly, I don't know. What is certain is that there is in the literature today a number of studies that show um, fibromyalgia, autism, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's.
Sure. Yeah. Did you think about the toxicity of breathing pure oxygen? Do you think 1 hour twice a day is enough to give you?
Yes, I've looked, of course, of course. I've looked, first of all, HBOT, okay, is authorized by the FDA, okay, for 7 or 8 different things. So it's safe, okay? And there's at least 27 trials today ongoing that have passed phase 1. So HBOT 1 hour a day for a few weeks is fine. It's been.
I think people aren't doing enough of it. They don't realize how long you have to do it for. I know a lot of
Yes,
people who've done 120 sessions.
if you don't, but you see, that's where Bolus theory is very important, because it explains what's happened, and it explains it explains that the reconstruction didn't happen after the damage, and therefore it had to be big. If it didn't work when the stem cells were there, and there's tons of it circulating, it means it requires time. It's just pure.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of the mother being pregnant, and the duration of the pregnancy shows that it's not going to happen in a week or two. I mean, you start having results very quickly. You can see a difference. Some people, for example, in the eyes, and some people are seeing within 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. They're saying, "Oh, I'm starting to see better," right? But you're not. But the repair is not there. The repair takes. If you need to repair an endocrine gland that's releasing your hormones, it's going to take time. It's going to take 2 months of it. But I mean, frankly, 2 hours a day for 2 months to regain.
No, and actually, pure oxygen is probably going to be cheaper for a lot of people than just going for a hyperbaric oxygen treatment.
Yes,
because
it's cheap. It's cheap. It's much more practical. I think also potentially it's safer. High pressure. I mean, no, it's 1.7. It's not like it's like you're going like 5 or 6 meter down the water. It's not crazy, but it's a constraint. There could be.
But all it's doing, I mean, I don't really know much about HBOT, but just like all it's doing is just speeding up how quickly you absorb the oxygen, right? So it's like, why not just breathe it for a longer period of time, as long as there's not pulmonary toxicity from 2 hours of pure oxygen?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. What I would do. That's why. I wouldn't do 2 hours in a row. But I'm sure it's okay. But
Yeah.
I would do 1 hour. 1 hour. It's simulating the same thing as the hyperbaric oxygen. It's reasonable. It's proven to be okay. So and if there's a toxicity, it'll be lower. It will be better. So it's all benefit. And the science behind it's pretty clear. It's Ross poisoning. It's very clear that stem cells are doing it. So you're almost certain that it works. Now the problem is it's very cheap, so nobody's been talking about it, right? It's extremely cheap. It's crazy. You can buy a concentrator for a few $100 and you're done. So no, but it's I don't know if maybe somebody will come and do something nasty to me because but I guess the word is out anyhow. But yeah, I think we can repair a
Do
lot
you
of
know
the
people who've tried this? I mean, I actually am really glad I spoke to you because I haven't had time to read all of your Substacks.
I haven't
But
written about that yet. I haven't written.
okay,
It's the first time
okay.
I
So,
talked about it.
told people to just try this. Try either HBot or the mentioned two of your
I
friends.
don't know personally anybody. I've been trying to convince a lot of people, notably two of my friends who are Parkinson's. I'm saying, guys, what do you have to lose? I mean, it's like safe. It's super safe,
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
don't have anything to lose. I don't get it, but a lot of the thing is, I presume the doctors are very dubious about it. At least some closed-minded doctors are dubious about it. But I, for example, my sister was harmed and she has arteriosclerosis right now. I had told her not to vaccinate. She did. She didn't listen to me. Like nobody listened to me, or very few people. Maybe some of my readers, but. And then she came back to me 6 months ago. She said, "What should I do?" And I said, "I don't know. Frankly, I mean, I have a few ideas, but I'm not going to tell you what to do because I don't want to harm you a bit more." So I didn't know. Now I know. I've worked. I've looked into nattokinase and bromelain, and I've looked into how it reduces plaque. And it's the same thing when you look at arteriosclerosis. It's going to be a very, very slow process. What you need to do is you need to remove the cholesterol and all the metabolic waste that's onto the plaque, and then the body needs to get rid of that plaque. But at the same time, you're also going to need to get those stem cells to repair the endothelium. Otherwise, it's never going to repair, and you're still going to have calcification. So apparently, it's sort of working. I'm not so sure if the endothelium is repaired, but I think for arteriosclerosis, it's going to be the same thing. Much longer, much more longer, most likely over a year or two, where you're going to have to get rid of very slowly get rid of the fat and the metabolic waste. Get the plaque. The body's going to reduce the plaque slowly and do it itself. We're not supposed to have calcification. So we have ways. The body knows it's not supposed to be there. It's going to take it away one step at a time. It's going to take months, it's not years. And then you need to also to repair the endothelium with stem cell generation. So it's exciting because you see with the Bolus theory. It's actually very funny because I'm not a doctor, but I have a much better view of what's happening in people's bodies because of it. It gives me a compass, right? It gives me and it's really nice to be able to say, well, I understand why fasting works. I can tell you why it's working, right? And so it was very interesting. But I said, well, if I'm right, then fasting should be working for that. And then I go and check the literature. So, well, yeah, it does. Okay, Parkinson, it works for Parkinson, it works for Alzheimer's. You see that whenever, as a consultant, when you have a theory, I break theory for a living. That's what I do for a living. I've been paid for that. So whenever you have a theory when things actually collide and match, and that's the case for stem cells being cancer cell of origin. It's the same thing for oxygen therapy. So it's good. I'm happy that now I have at least some kind of proposal. So a lot of people are talking about other things, ozonation, other things that do the same thing, etc. I'm not going there. I don't know. Maybe I don't know if there are adverse events. I know that HBOT has been tested 1 hour a day for 40 days or more, and there's no problem. I'm pretty sure that people have had pure oxygen for weeks when they're in the hospital and without any big problems. So I'm pretty confident that having one session, an hour in the morning, an hour at night of pure oxygen for 40 days is going to be fine. It's going to be fine.
Yeah, I'm going to start recommending people do it. And I think I'll even try it for some of my family members. I mean, you've convinced me for sure. But you're right. I think a lot of these other things, I mean, I was just looking it up, maybe even ivermectin is working in a similar way to increase reactive oxygen species, oxidative stress. But I really got to run. This was fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to put this up on Twitter and Rumble, and I'll let you know so that you can hopefully retweet it. And covidmythbusters.substack.com, right? That's your sub. Okay, yeah, I highly recommend people go and subscribe to your Substack.
Oh yeah, I'm broke. I didn't say anything, but I basically, you know, I've committed financial seppuku. I've worked basically almost full time for the past 3 or 4 years. I've let down to a certain extent, my family's interest for the greater good. Thankfully, at least I got some results. But right now, my results are, you know, I'm hardly visible. Nobody talks about it, but I mean, Brett Weinstein has nicely talked about it very briefly, but Brett doesn't know my bullet theory.
Yeah, he basically just mentioned it in passing.
Yeah, he's just talking about aspiration. He thinks it's another branch of aspiration, but it's much more sophisticated and deep. And there's a lot. There's a lot of insights. You know, I've been working on this on the Bolus theory for over 2 years now. 2.5 years at least now. And the insights are just phenomenal. They're just, you know, it brings you understand why people have multiple illnesses together, right? You understand why an obese would have inflammation because he's got a leaky gut, etc. It's actually there's a part that's very exciting. There's a part that's very sad, and I've been doing this to avoid kids being damaged for a very long time. I'm super happy that at least I have some degree of solutions. Of course, you're not going to bring back people who died, but if we can stop this madness, that's already good. And then if we can improve the lives of so many who are suffering, that's awesome. That would be awesome. So if people
I'm going to tell as many people as I can about this. I mean, I highly recommend. I am actually subscribed to your Substack, so I recommend people go to covidmythbuster.substack.com.
If they get to the paid version, because I haven't paid my rent for 2 months. So
yeah, and you mentioned a book. Are you publishing a book, or is that coming?
Well, I'm trying to find an editor. Yeah, the book is it's called The Needle's Secret. Do I have it here? Yeah, it's here. Let me show you. It's called The Needle's Secret. I try to make it accessible to people. It's basically it was harder than I thought because my brain didn't like having to rewrite some of the stuff I wrote on Substack. But it's here it is, you know.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much. This was fantastic. Thank you so much.
It was great meeting you. So where are you based, by the way? You're in Arizona.
Puerto Rico.
Right? Oh, you're in Puerto Rico.
It's back. Yeah. So east of the East Coast. Yep.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.